hosted by Stan Boness.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Lawrence.
And I am Jen Knox, and we are here today with Scott Butcher, one of our colleagues that digs deep in trends. So we're excited to have a conversation for you all. Scott, so tell us, for workforce trends in 2023, what do you think is the biggest thing that AEC firms need to be on the lookout for?
Well, Jen, that's a whole lot to unpack.
I know.
But,
We only have
I
20
think,
minutes, so it's
yeah. So what's the data telling us? Well, the end of last year, Stamble and us, we conducted a survey, and we were asking, what are the most important or critical challenges over the next 6 months? And the design and construction community overwhelmingly responded with recruitment. And then in February of this year, we gave a webinar and we asked the same question, and it was still overwhelming recruitment. So we know the data is holding. Design and construction firms, it doesn't matter if you're an architecture firm, an engineering firm, where you are, a contractor, construction manager, subcontractor, everybody is still struggling with talent right now. And it's really disruptive because now they have projects under contract, they can't get out the door. Schedules are falling behind, or maybe there's quality issues that are coming about because of it. We have clients that just have huge holes. We're working with a very large client that has a pretty average turnover rate, but between their job openings right now at this moment in time and their anticipated turnover, they need to hire 300 jobs, 300 positions in a very short period of time, and they're not finding the talent is there in their geographic markets. So yeah, there's pockets where maybe firms are a little slower. I think what we see more is third quarter slowdown for a lot of firms in the industry. They're going to be plugging along till then. But until that point, a lot of them don't have everybody that they need on staff right now.
Yeah, and I know you said in there that, right, in specific geographic areas, maybe they're not finding firms or finding potential employees. Do you find firms are kind of expanding their kind of reach and pool and looking outside of maybe their immediate geography to see if they can bring on some remote workers? Or is that something that AEC really hasn't gotten into yet?
Well, the favorite answer of everything is it depends.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're seeing that among we are seeing some clients that are expanding, and we're seeing some clients that are refusing to because they want people in their office on site. But by way of an example, a client we're working with, they are in Southern California and Southwest United States. About a year and a half ago, they tried to do semi-local recruitment via LinkedIn as the recruitment tool, and were very, very disappointed in the options they got. And then they decided again just a few months ago to try again with LinkedIn, but make it national. And they made a strategic decision as a company that they would hire people where those people are and allow them to work remotely. And they were overwhelmed by the response, and they were able to fill all the positions they had opening, as well as have some real quality candidates for future positions. What made that possible was broadening the geographic region that they would recruit from and allowing remote work. On the other hand, we have some companies that, because their culture is very much being in the office, that's what they want to keep. They don't want to lose that culture by integrating remote workers from other areas of the United States. At least that's what they're saying right now. But if they can't find the talent, then there's a pretty significant issue they need to address.
So, Scott, I want to back up and kind of look at really the data. So are we looking at talent shortages mainly in those entry level positions, like for an architecture firm, most draftsmen or designers? Are we looking at senior level positions that they're having trouble finding? Because I think that would make a difference too, in my opinion, of being on site or making sure you're in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question, Emily. And I think the reality is when you look at the demographics, we're getting hit hard at both ends, and we had a major event that's impacting the middle. So let's unpack that. So go back to 1960. 1960 was a peak year in childbirth in the United States. The average adult woman had 3.7 children. Um, I
Yeah,
wouldn't call myself a
the
point
point
seven. I
seven.
wasn't born that year, by the way, not to
That's you, Scott.
get
You're
that out
point
there. But
seven.
on average, 3.7 children. And so the reason I picked 1960 there is that in the year 2025, that'll be retirement age for those children born that year. So 3.7 children. Now we go to the year 2020, and the average woman has about 1.5 children. So we've seen a very, very significant decline in the child birth rate. And this middle event that has happened was the Great Recession. So during the Great Recession, there was a further decline in childbirth above where it is today, but a further decline. And those children that were born during the Great Recession are now entering college in 2025. And so what we're seeing on the workforce is you have a much smaller cohort of students entering college and then entering the workforce. And on the other end, you have these baby boomers that are rapidly leaving the workforce. You've probably heard the statistic, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day. Within the next 2 years, that'll be 12,000. It doesn't mean they're retiring, but it does mean that a much higher percentage of the population is of retirement age. And so we're hit from both sides here. And the other thing about that big event, that Great Recession, is we had a time for a couple years in this industry, because even though the recession, when you look at the official recession statistics, was relatively short, it was pretty deep. And in the built environment, architecture, engineering, construction, environmental, it extended multiple years. And so because of that, there was a whole bunch of just a large population of more entry level, even pre-mid manager type jobs that left the industry. And so we're being impacted by that now in the middle. There was an article in US News and World Report, I think it was in 2009, that ranked the most useless college degrees. Number one was architect. So you had architects and engineers that just left the profession. And so now middle management, there's a big gap in our companies because of that event, that Great Recession. So we're hit in the middle. We're hit because there's not enough graduates coming out of college, and we're hit because all the baby boomers moving into retirement.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so tough because it is that middle management piece that's so key to developing, I think, culture at an organization, how your succession planning will happen in that leadership development. So not having that kind of next gen of leaders to lean on and grow and develop is, I think, probably tough for some firms. They're almost needing to skip a generation, look a little bit lower in the organization for those leaders. So I know coming from construction, that succession planning and that knowledge transfer is so important. And if you have a generation or a gap in there where you don't have a lot of that middle management, it can be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is when you look at the projections of the workforce in the year 2030, estimated across all industries, about 2/3 of the workforce will be from the millennial generation, which is 27-ish to 42-ish right now. And then Gen Z. So Gen Z are the newer members of the workforce. So 2/3 of our workforce will be from those two generations. Yet we have clients we're working with right now, particularly on the engineering side, where they're already there. Have already reached the year 2030 or even into the 2030s with the demographics of their workforce. So part of that is the demand for jobs. So there's a lot of hiring of younger professionals right now. And it is also kind of demonstrating the exodus that is happening among the baby boomers. And so, Jen, when you talk about the generation being skipped, that's my generation, that's Gen X. That's so on point with Gen X. Just totally skip over us. People don't remember we exist, right?
It's just my entitlement as a millennial.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So we're playing the stereotype.
But it is absolutely true that there aren't enough Gen Xers because it was a much smaller generation to fill the void of the vacating baby boomers.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think firms will need to think about strategically bringing maybe some underrepresented groups into the workforce, into the industry in general, right? We see women as low representation, people of color, people that have immigrated to the United States, will those be more important to solve this workforce problem?
Well,
We
I
don't
think
have a
that's
choice.
key, right? Like that's historically an issue. Like I just want to pause there because that's historically an issue. I mean, in architecture, engineering, and construction, well, architecture and engineering specifically, maybe not quite as much um, for construction, but for women in construction, absolutely. But I do want to pause there and just note that that's huge. Like, what are we doing as, as an industry to move that forward? And what are the impacts on our industry if we don't
Well,
move that forward?
go to the data. What is the data
Yeah.
telling us? The data tells us that 16% of licensed engineers in the United States are women. 17% of licensed architects in the United States are women. Roughly 12% of construction managers in the United States are women. Clearly, clearly there is a gender issue. And what's driving the gender issue? It's gender bias. It's not creating, updating policies that work for working women. But it's probably not one single thing, because there are a lot of women that when they look for a career, they don't even think of engineering. Yeah, that's dominated by men, right? You've probably heard that before. So we need to hit women. And then we'll get to the other underrepresented professionals. But we need to hit women when they're girls, when they're young, when they're in K through 12, and give them uh, options. Let them know there are these engineering careers. I mean, STEM goes beyond engineering. STEM's huge. But it's also an area where there aren't enough women represented. So as a profession, Emily, to your point about, filling in some of the gaps, or bridging the talent gap that we see, certainly if we can be more attractive to women, first off, that is going to feed the talent pipeline. The second thing is when we look at just the demographics, when we talk about race and ethnicity. So when 52% ish of college students are white, and we look in the engineering school and it's 60%, well, that already tells us it's not as diverse as it could or should be. Then we look at African American, Black, in race and ethnicity, and we see 15% of college students, yet only 4% of engineering students. Or Hispanic and Latino, almost 20% of college students, and yet only 11% of engineering students. So this is telling us that our talent pipeline, what's feeding into our companies, is still not, number one, representative of society, and number two, even representative of college. Because again, we have these underrepresented groups that are looking for careers in engineering, architecture, construction, environmental, whatever the case may be, and they're saying that's not for me. And why are they saying it's not for me? Because they're looking around, and as a middle-aged white male, I can say this: the boardrooms are middle-aged and older white males for these companies. So we're not representative of them. We're not representative of society, and that's a demotivator to go into this as a career.
Yeah, and I think younger generations, like I know millennials and beyond, right, that are entering the workforce, it's like that's a huge deal, right? Is that diversity and seeing that and seeing like, do I have a path? Is this a fair company? And is this, a company that thinks progressively? And I think, I even think of my own experience where I was like, this is absolutely a values mismatch of where I am
Sure.
at a job, because we're working on a women in construction campaign, and the marketing team, who is female, was not even in the room for the decision of what we were going to be doing for a women in construction campaign. There was not a single female in the room making that decision and on what the campaign should look like. And that was my first question: was there a woman in the room when we were deciding what this campaign would look like? And there wasn't, right? And so that's like an extreme like values mismatch. For me, why a major reason why I would leave a company would be that.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about retention, I mean, that's huge.
Well, when you let that retention part, right? For as many women as we have at least gotten into STEM fields and STEM careers, I think to your point, Emily, the retention of them is a big problem too, right? We've done all this work in, elementary school, middle school, educating women that, STEM is a viable career for them. But then they get into the workplace and they have these interactions, maybe with culture that has that mismatch, those mismatched values. So I think companies need to be so intentional about understanding the culture they're building, and if it is inclusive of, diversity, whether it's, sex or race, etc. Because that's really where you'll see people leave because of their day-to-day experiences.
Yeah, one of the concerns I have is diversity washing. So you think back 10, 15 years ago, this industry was really focused on sustainability and LEED certification. And, the original LEED, and look, the U.S. Green Building Council did a lot to really elevate the conversation around sustainability, created the certification program. But, if you think back to the early certifications, you could get points for putting in a bike rack towards your sustainability goal, but you didn't get points for reusing an existing building. There's nothing larger in this world to recycle than a building, and you seem to get penalized by not building a shiny, new, fancy, sustainable building. And so there was a bit of an uproar, and this term of greenwashing came to be. So then, fast forward to a couple years ago, a lot of companies started implementing DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, or JEDI committees, and we've experienced firms that are just doing that as sort of a diversity washing, that they say, hey, we have a committee, and then you talk to the people on the committee and they're like, we're not doing anything, we're not making any change, this is just a bullet point in marketing. And this isn't just AEC, this is across all these industries. Recently there was some research released that found that quietly companies have been getting rid of their diversity officers. So they were hired with great fanfare 2 years ago to bring in greater racial and ethnic talent to be more attractive to multi-gender roles. And now, 2 years later, the companies are just kind of quietly getting rid of those positions. And so how do we make this sustainable? I mean, I think sustainability, in the built environment is about environmental sustainability, but when we talk about it, it's about corporate sustainability. How do we survive as businesses? How do we survive as an industry? It ain't going to happen unless we get better about true, meaningful, intentional DEI in the workplace.
Yeah, not even just, yeah, like you said, meeting those standards, but really having it embedded as, a thought, not an afterthought, or like, oh yeah, we need to meet this standard to, go along with our value, quote unquote, but actually having it be part at the forefront of the conversation and a reminder every day of what we're doing. Because I mean, that's just such a big turnoff, is like you see all these things, right? Like, oh, they have this in their values or their mission statement, or they have a single female in the leadership team. And then you get there and it's like, this is not what I signed up for. Like, I don't see this,
And Emily, and I don't fault the firms for the current board of directors, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
an industry that was white male forever. And as a result of that, most board of directors that we deal with reflect that. Yet when you have a mission of diversity, equity, inclusion, and you land on the company website and you go to the leadership page and it's all a bunch of white men, that's a statement. And so I love it that they're trying to be more inclusive, that they're trying to create an environment that allows different genders, that allows different races to succeed and thrive. And ideally, in the coming years, the corporate leadership page will be more diverse. That's putting your money where your mouth is. But right now, it's just not, there's not a lot of firms that have it. And so that's what you hear about in conversations is, yeah, they talk about it, but they're not walking the walk.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I want to, okay, so we've kind of hit on, right, sustainability. I think a lot of people, when they're looking at a potential employer, they look at sustainability. Like, if I am going into the office, is there sort of an environment that I'd like to be in every day? Do I feel like this is, I mean, it's sort of that corporate social responsibility, right? Are they socially responsible? Do they take that on? And then we've talked about diversity. and really walking the walk, not just talking the talk, right? So I wonder, is there anything else as we're looking at workforce shortages or, just sort of that workforce develop, like what else are people looking for? What else are we seeing in there? Because I think those are huge things, but I know there's a multitude of issues and factors coming in.
There's a statistic out there that 94% of employees will stay with a company, their employer, longer if that company invests in their professional development. So really, I think it's a talent development issue as well that's happening. We work with a lot of companies. We provide training to a lot of companies, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. What we're seeing is, a couple of trends that are coming together. One of them is the exodus of the more experienced staff. Unfortunately, a lot of times they're taking the knowledge with them, and that hasn't been transferred to the younger generation. So, we try to help companies become more intentional about that knowledge transfer. That's number one. Number two is we're also seeing different skills for younger members of the workplace. They are coming in with crazy digital skills, never before seen. The ability to find things online, to utilize new technologies, to get a software program out of the box, which means, downloaded from the cloud these days, and immediately, even though they've never been in it, start using it. Whereas, for me, it's like, where do I even start, right? So that's a positive. Part of the negative, though, and I'll pick on my son. My son is 16 years old, and his life is a cell phone. And when he hangs out with friends, he's playing video games. He's not with anybody in person. Or maybe they have FaceTime on, except his phone's sitting flat on his desk, pointing to the ceiling. And I look over, and the friend he's playing video games with, their phone is pointing to the ceiling. So they're not having any face-to-face interaction. So what we're seeing is somewhat of a decline in the soft skills for the younger generations. And really, that's communication skills is critical. And I think that's the obvious, but I think maybe less obvious of that is the emotional intelligence of being able to look at people, watch their nonverbals, understand the true interpretation of what they're saying. That's great for us because we see training opportunities, but I think larger, it's a challenge for some workplaces, but it's also an opportunity when we talk about retention. If we can start taking these younger professionals in the workplace and upskilling them, giving them some of the communication, the interpersonal, the soft skills that they might not already have, that's really going to accelerate their advancement into management and leadership.
And I
So
think
as far as, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, I think we need to be cognizant of not to have kind of this look down upon them because they don't have those social skills, right? It's like when we may have been more social growing up, but we weren't so tech savvy, right? It's a plus and a minus on both sides. And being able to say, okay, now we can invest in you to elevate, your ability in the workforce even more. This is a great opportunity. So not making them feel bad that they don't have those social skills, right? But showing them that, hey, this could even take you to another level in your career. So yeah.
Well, look, in fairness to them, they don't know what they don't know. And if they weren't given those skills by their schools, by their family, whatever the case may be, that's not on them.
Yeah.
That's on the system that allowed that to happen.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes leaders are like, oh, why should I have to train them on how to interact socially? It's just not it's not the environment that they grew up in. So we shouldn't think badly of that.
It's funny, Jen, several years ago, I went to an event where it was facilities managers from higher education, and they were talking about some of the trends in facilities. And so it was really fascinating. And I will never forget, there was a smaller private school that their facilities manager said that for freshmen, the first 2 weeks of school is actually onboarding to the culture of being away at college. And they are forcing people into groups to interact with one another. But what really stuck with me and it kind of shocked me and everybody else in the audience was he said, yeah, we're going back to gang showers because if you shower with somebody, you automatically have a deeper relationship. And we're like, no.
Not for the workplace.
Absolutely can't do that these days. No.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Gang showers is not the solution to increasing or improving interpersonal skills.
Yeah, that would be a shock. I would walk.
Yeah.
I think, as far as really like the workforce that we're seeing right now, so we're seeing this push, right, of younger generation. I mean, I even think of skills like email writing. Like that's the hardest thing, right? We're text form, we're short form for most communication, right? Like just so you said, day-to-day communication that most younger generations are brought up with, you're texting. Like I remember when we would sit on the phone for hours and talk to each other. But I mean, it's for the most part, it's texting. And I think a lot of people are just more comfortable doing that now. And it's short form and it's, there's no rules really. There's emojis. And I know, Scott, we've talked about emojis before. And that's even coming onto LinkedIn as a trend, right? Where you're seeing emojis in your captions. And so, I mean, I do think that there's this real gap of communication, but it's, do you meet someone that's younger where they're at, or do you expect them to meet how it's always been? Right? Like, I think that there's kind of a debate you could look at. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that, just for like any closing thoughts here.
From my standpoint, you meet in the middle. It's a
Mhm.
both and, not an either or. Um, I love writing. I've written a whole bunch of books. I feel that writing is a dying art, and it was dying before ChatGPT is now taking all the writing roles.
Completely
But
done.
there is still something to be said for appropriate writing, appropriate use of grammar and syntax, and there are absolutely today, at this moment in time, there are areas where that is totally required.
Mhm.
I mean, we've heard these horror stories. I love this one. It's a marketing horror story. I feel bad for the company it happened to, but they submitted a proposal that they spent several weeks working on. The cover letter was so poorly written, it went to a school district. The superintendent of the school district marked it as an F, made all sorts of proofreaders marks, and sent it back, never even opening the proposal.
Oh
So
no.
thousands of dollars of effort thrown away because of poor writing. We need to be cognizant of that. On the other hand, you're right, Emily. It is a world of short communications, of 140 characters, of text, of emojis, of these acronyms and abbreviations that are increasingly difficult to keep up with. And that's the way, not just one, but now really two generations, millennials and Gen Z in the workforce, have been communicating. So there's a medium. I don't know if it's a happy medium, but there's a medium where I should not expect you to write War and Peace, and you should not expect me to write back in 7 emojis. There's something in the middle. And I
Yeah.
think that's actually going to strengthen the communications between the generations, because I still see a lot of, and it's not one generation to the next. It seems like every generation now is like circling the wagons and bumping up against each other in these different cultural things. And in my lifetime, I don't think I've seen that. Gen X, what do? We looked at the baby boomers, we emulated them. That was what we did. Then the millennials came along and said, you know what? I don't need to be a copycat. We can do things the way that makes sense for us. And Gen Z saw that and said, yeah, what you said, but for me, for us.
Mhm.
And so we need to recognize that and not just respect it, but we need to celebrate it.
And
Mhm.
leverage it.
Yeah,
Leverage it. Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Good point, Jen. Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. This was a great conversation. Jen, thank you, my lovely co-host. We will have another episode, so please tune in with us next month, and we will be talking about some AI and automation trends.
I'm excited for that conversation, Emily.
Yes, and
It'll be a
Scott.
Excited and terrified.
Yeah, right. Scott, we are gonna have you back on again. So,
Excellent.
Thanks,
Well, I
our
guys.
look forward
amazing
to it. Thank you so
colleague
much.
with all of your wonderful insights and trends. So, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, guys.